Hello, everyone. Hi. How are we doing tonight? We're good? Woo. Thank you for waiting. Welcome. I know it's the end of the school year. APs are on, state exams, so thanks for taking out time on a Tuesday for this. I'm just going to introduce Word Up, right? Who here has been to Word Up before? Woo! Yeah. All right. For those who haven't, a little bit about us. We are a community bookshop and art space located on the corner of 165th Street in Amsterdam. We started as a pop-up 12 years ago, across the street from here, actually. We are cooperatively run by a collective of around 60 neighbors. We love to host events like this, workshops, open mics, and anything you can imagine at this space and our new space, Recirculation. Recirculation started when a former collective member of ours passed from COVID and left us in charge of his books and records. And that's a really great location for you to check out. We have a lot of pay-what-you-can books and fabulous events for all ages. And additionally, we also host a community fridge and other activities to try and support a healthy community. And we just want to thank the people who made this event possible. Having something like this uptown is really important to us. So we want to thank the United Palace for hosting us, this historic place. Simon & Schuster. The Dream Yard Project, we're going to be hearing from one of their young poets and their poetry director, Ellen Hagen. The Algarabia Language Services for Spanish language interpretation and Inclusive Communication Services for ASL interpretation. And all of the Word Up Collective members who helped us set up this event, and also all of you for coming tonight. Thank you. I'm really excited about this. We run a teen book club called Lomas Lit, and I really, really love it. Look out for when we start our next round of registration. And one of the books we read was Long Way Down. No, you're correct about that. It's a really great book. And Word Up, we've just had this far away, I think somewhat familiar for people who love reading, Love Affair with Jason Reynolds. So we're really excited for this event. If you want to tag us in anything or just follow us to keep abreast of what we're doing, you can find us everything on social media at Word Up Books. And I'm going to stop talking because there's somebody out here a wordsmith, okay, a true wordsmith. Their name is Yannick Valbrun. They're a Haitian-American middle school student at Bronx Community Charter School. They participated in the Dream Yard Project's spoken word class, and they are from Norwood in the Bronx. And aside from their love of poetry, they enjoy skateboarding, much like Miles, and baking cookies. So give a warm round of applause for Yannick Valbrun.
Hi, my name is Yannick. I am a poet at Bronx Community Charter School. Before I start, I was told to thank the people who have helped me become who I am right now and be here. I just want to say that I'm thankful to all the teachers that have helped me get here. The title of my poem is Let Me Tell You. Let me tell you about all the people that never stand still. The people that dance through life, leaving an impact on everyone who hears, their words like silk, weaving themselves through hearts and souls, hopes and dreams. The people that soar across city skies like murderers or crows, fast, smart, and free. Free. When I look up in the sky and see them flying, all I think is free. The people that breathe color into the world, changing those who can only see in black and white. The people who can turn a pile of trash into art, a lesson into an experience, leftovers into a Thanksgiving feast. The people living their truths and the people living their best lives. The people holding it in, supporting those who can't stop letting it out. I wish I could let it out. I wish I never told myself not to cry because now the tears won't fall. Now every reaction is wrong, like my life is a song composed by a 2-year-old, a note too high and missed one too many times. My people, We are beauty and struggle, sunshine and storm, love and pain, loss and gain. We are surrounded yet alone, trying to get home, to raise mirrors and emotions to family, to friends, to a culture that never ends. My people are everywhere. You just have to find them. Thank you.
Thank you, Yana. It's not Jason Reynolds yet. My name is Veronica Santiago Liu, and I'm one of the founding collective members and coordinators at Up Community Bookshop. And I'm very pleased to introduce our most special guests of this evening. Jason Reynolds is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and the recipient of many, many awards. Jason lives in Washington, D.C., but manages to show up everywhere for young people. He was the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature for 3 years in a row, 2020 to 2022. He's the author of many, many books, including All American Boys, co-written with Brendan Kiley, Stamped, the Track series, Long Way Down, and of course, Miles Morales, and the book we're celebrating tonight, Miles Morales Suspended. While I'm up here, I want to give a personal thank you to Jason for his brain yoga on Instagram that kept me and my kid Lester engrossed during some wild days in mid-2020. We are so grateful that he's made his way to Washington Heights to be with us tonight. Jay Wortham, they, them, is a sound healer, Reiki practitioner, herbalist, and community care worker oriented toward healing justice and liberation, and will be in conversation with Jason tonight. They are a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, co-host of the podcast Still Processing, and the proud co-editor with Kimberly Drew of the acclaimed visual anthology Black Futures. Jay is currently working on a book about the body and dissociation, and they mostly live and work on stolen Muncie Lenape land, now known as Brooklyn. They are committed to decolonization as a way of life. Please show some love for Jason Reynolds and Jay Wortham.
Good evening. Should we disrobe?
You gonna take one layer off?
Yeah, we can.
All right, me too.
Y'all all right? How many of y'all ever been in here? Exactly. It's beautiful in here. Only people who live up here in the Heights. Everybody else is like, wow, it's amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Thank y'all for hosting us.
Yeah, special thank you to Word Up for having us, to the space, to the crew, everybody that's staying here late tonight so we can have this incredible conversation with Jason. And I just want to start off by saying congratulations. It's not a small thing to write a book, let alone this book.
Thank you for
So
that.
just shout out to you.
Hardest thing in the world, so I appreciate that.
I mean, just to start, I just wanted to hear about the process of bringing this together. A sequel is not an easy thing to do. It's also been a little while since the first one came out. So what's the process been like for you bringing this together?
I think, it's interesting. You don't really know, for me, I didn't really know when I wrote the first one that I would write another one. Because you just don't know, right? I'm not a person who is like, I'm going to write 3 of these or I'm going to write 4 of these, right? It's not really my way of thinking. Mainly because I don't think about extra work in that way, right? I'm not gonna plan out my work down the line. It's more like I'm gonna make this thing. We'll see what happens. And if something happens good, then maybe we'll revisit it in the future. I'm leery about sequels because sequels are rarely good. And I'm always afraid of sequels getting in the way of the legacy of the good thing, right? Like if you make a thing that's good, it's always, dangerous to go back to the well. Sometimes you gotta, as the elders say, leave well enough alone, which is what I was planning on. But then an opportunity came, and it was all sorts of stuff sort of worked out in funny ways in the publishing world that's boring, but that's interesting for this project, that put me in a situation where I was like, oh, you know what? I could probably do this again. Especially since there was so much chatter, and there has been so much chatter about censorship and challenging and banning and all of these sorts of things. And I'm always interested in using something like Spider-Man or, anything that feels benign to create something that's poignant and that's sort of tapping at the pulse of a thing. And that was sort of where it started, right? And then conceptually, I I was like, well, there's going to be a sequel. Let me go back and read the first one, because it had been a few years. And there was a lot of books in between. So let me go back and read the first one. And I'm like, man, for those of you who read the first one, at the end of it, he basically stages a protest in the classroom. And I was like, man, this is cool for this book, but a bummer as I have to write this second one, because there's no way that he does not get in trouble. And so suddenly I was faced with the conundrum, because Miles would have to be in school suspension. And I realized in that moment, like, if I write a sequel, the whole book, he's gonna be in a single room and somehow still has to be Spider-Man,
Right.
which is an ultimate challenge, right? And that was sort of the way it all started. And I was like, well, I might as well lean into the difficulty. Let's see if I can figure this out.
And you did.
Thank you.
And this book, to me, was really compelling because the form is so different.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. There are a lot of line breaks, the narration is different.
Yeah, it was a bet. Some friends betted me, and I had some buddies bet me. They write fantasy, and we get into these arguments all the time about like my friends who write fantasy. I'm like, man, y'all are the most imaginative human beings in the world, in concept, and the most boring people in the world in form, right? And then they get upset, we have arguments, we fight, we yell at each other, and they're like, you don't get it, our readers are this way and that way. And I'm like, but you are artists. Like, just why not have a fantasy book written in verse? It wouldn't work. It's all this kind of, we get at it all the time, right? And so, I said, well, one day I'm gonna try, right? And so when it came to this one, this isn't obviously fantasy, right? But it has sort of fantastic elements. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to see what happens if Spider-Man if everything Miles is saying is in verse, right? And then there's like a third person narrator, there's like a sort of an omniscient narrator, sort of giving you all the environmental context. So Miles speaks in verse, and then you get prose building out the scene. Right? So you get both of these things sort of dancing on the page simultaneously, which, one, I think is an interesting way to read. Two, I wanted to cast the widest net, no pun intended, cast the widest net possible when it came to readership, right? It's like if you're a comic person, there are sort of small blocks of words on the pages similar to reading a comic, right? Reading cells on a page. If you're a novel person, there's prose in the book if you like the longer form. There's art in the book if you like art, right? If you want to get into your graphic novels and your comics as well, right? Figuring out how can I do all of these things in a single project, in a single piece of literature that touches on everything, right? If you're interested in the adventure of it all, if you're interested in the story of it, if you want something that feels intentional and thinking of, and current, right? At the same time, if you want something funny, a little bit of everything is sort of wrapped up in this, in this book.
There's a beautiful part, and this is not a spoiler, where one of the verse inserts is Miles thinking about what it means to have spidey-sense.
Yeah.
And what it feels like. Which is also such a fun meditation for anybody who likes Spider-Man, just to be like, dang, I never thought about that, Like, you see it visually, but then to hear this internal process is kind of amazing. But then it continues, and it's like, well, I do have this additional ability, right? But I already had it because of who I am and where I'm from.
Yeah. I'll give you, so look, here's the secret. And I don't think I've ever said this publicly. And some of the Marvel folk are here. So scratch it from the record, Marvel folk. But when I first took on the job to do the first Miles Morales, this is before the movie and all of that stuff. I was in an office. This is when they were still with Disney, so I was in the Disney office. Sour grapes, I apologize if that's, but that's what it was. And they asked me at the time, what's your inspiration behind your version of Miles Morales? And my response was Kevin Durant. And nobody knows this. I never say it out loud, but here we are. It was Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant grew up down the street from me. And I know his neighborhood. I know the apartments in which he grew up. I know his environment because I come from an environment down the block. And when people were asking me what what's a superpower to kids in my neighborhood? To us, it was the day that Kevin Durant got drafted to the NBA. To be a kid from that neighborhood, a single mom, living in an apartment, and then the next day, you're Kevin Durant, right? You're worth $1 gazillion. You're on a main stage. You got commercials. You are a hero to so many people. That's a superpower, right? But we also, I also was telling the folks that, but it's not just that. It's that he had already had superpowers to get him there. Because in order to survive in that community, you have to know when the bad things are coming far before they get there. It's a spidey-sense. If you live in Washington Heights, right, you are wired to know when it's getting ready to get a little funky and it's time to boogie, right? We know this. If you live in Bed-Stuy, which is where I lived for 15 years, the kids in Bed-Stuy knew, hey, let's go this way, right? It's a sense that you have for survival. And so thinking about Kevin and thinking about what it was like to like be Kevin Durant in high school, in college, and then to be Kevin Durant the next day, to be a very different person, and then to come back to walk to like your community in this neighborhood, in this lower income community, and to have to deal with like whether or not you feel like it's deserving, whether or not you feel different than the people that in your environment, like trying to make sure that everybody is proud of you, like but dealing with like the new complications of having a different superpower that you've never had before, and everyone expecting you to be responsible with it, right? How you tell a boy from that neighborhood to be responsible with $50 million? Tricky, right? In the same way, how do you tell a kid from Brooklyn who suddenly has superhuman strength to use it responsibly?
That's right.
Right? Like thinking about all of those things is sort of where it's sort of wrapped up in who Miles is as a person, right? I actually think that his greatest superpower has everything to do with his integrity, right? His integrity, his discipline, his ability to sort of hold the line when things get a little uncomfortable, right? His acknowledgement of that which is true, that's a superpower, right? His ability to sort of fly through the air for Miles actually is technology, first of all, right? Because he has sort of his web shooters, right? And then his camouflage, we all got that, right? His ability to camouflage, we all have it. Miles the only superhero that puts on a mask and is invisible and takes off a mask and still invisible. Right? Like those are the things that I'm considering when creating my version of Miles.
I love hearing you speak on that because I think that tension between ordinary and extraordinary is something that in a fantasy world is a superpower, but for people of the global majority it's what we're thinking about all the time, like these day-to-day things of our lives that are extraordinary but seem very ordinary, and then things that seem very ordinary become really extraordinary. So I really appreciate hearing you talk about that. I mean, I think I'm also curious too about how to take that awareness and all those elements and that interiority that the prose allows for, and how do you meld that into something that's so canon, coming from Marvel, you know, the history of Marvel Universe?
It's tough. It's tough. It's trial and error. I mean, when I did things I could not do, they told me I could not do that, right? It's like, that ain't gonna fly, you know? But for the most part, my hat off to them. And even the first time, in the first version of this book, the one before this one, both times, they've been completely game with me pushing the envelope. You would think, right? I have a lot of respect for Marvel as an institution in terms of the history of it and the way that they're unafraid to push the line, right? Because some of the stuff that I'm talking about and that I try to get at in these books, I was afraid at first that Marvel would be like, hey man, like this is a lot, right? But instead, they never bat an eye. It's like, all right, like if we're going here, let's go all the way, right? If you want to talk about this particular thing, if you want to create an enemy that is sort of an element of society, right? Not a person, but like an element of society, and you want to really tackle that in a superhero story, specifically using Miles Morales, and still make it fun because he's still a teenager just living his life, then all right, just pull it off. You just got to do it well, right? But like we're game for you to swing the bat as hard as possible. And if you know anything about Marvel and their history, this is not uncommon, right? Historically, they've always been at the precipice of like the social whatever's happening in society. They're using the comics to sort of push that and to sort of twist the knife and to say like, hey, these things are going on in our society that we should probably take note of or fight against or push back against. Like we do know who the enemy is, right? The enemy is hatred. The enemy is fear, right? The enemy is intolerance and the lack of acceptance, right? Like what the enemy is, what it's always been. And we'll figure out how to sort of personify that, how to embody that, right? And create sort of characters that do that. But the truth of the matter is that the enemies have always been the same enemies, right? The enemy is envy. The enemy is ego, right? In the comics, like that's sort of how it works. And in my story, the enemy is censorship, but it doesn't feel so on the nose, because who wants that, right? Nobody wants to be preached to, right? There's a real villain in the story, and he is villainous, but not in the way that you think, which is always what I want to wrestle with.
Yeah, I really liked. Again, no spoilers.
I know, no spoilers.
No spoilers, from me anyway. But I really appreciated that, getting to that ending. I really loved thinking about how the book is so anchored in right now and so much of what authors like yourself are dealing with. And I don't know, I was hoping you might talk a little bit more about the censorship and what you're seeing and kind of how that's been landing on you and your community.
It's tricky because there's a part of me that's so angry about it. And there's another part of me that is trying to figure out better ways to use my energy. So the censoring is happening. The challenging and the banning of my books and many of my colleagues' books are happening all over the country. But what's happening more are the thousands of librarians and teachers who are fighting back. And it just feels, sometimes it feels a bit dismissive to not pour my energy and love there, right? I was raised by a woman, my mom, who would always be very clear about how what everybody think about you ain't none of your business, right? It's sort of the way I was raised. So if you hate me, it ain't got nothing to do with me, right? You get to feel however you feel about me. The issue, though, is your hatred for me getting in the way of everybody else's sort of entertainment, let alone edification. I'm not a person who believes that everything I make is some sort of lesson, right? It's not even like that. For me, I recognize that this is a piece of art. I work in an entertainment space. I like to make something that young people actually like, right? For me, it's all very simple. I just want you to like it, because if I can get you to like it, then you'll read it, and if you'll read it, then you'll read something else. And I just need you to have a relationship with literacy so that you can be free in the world. Right, that's it. That's always what I'm thinking about. It's not always like, I want you to think about racism. I want you to think, it's like, look, I want you to think about language, because then you'll be able to actually combat racism and everything else, right? And all the other ills of the world. And so I think, ultimately, I just try to make sure I'm loving on the librarians and the teachers and the parents and all of the institutions that are pushing back against it. And for the people who are afraid of what a young person might discover in these books, the truth of the matter is that for those people, they should be very, very afraid, right? That's a fact, right?
Right?
It is what it is.
Right? Come on. Thank you for that. What can we do? I mean, not to put you on the spot in that way, but I feel like you're just so much closer because you do work so closely with librarians and independent bookstores, and I know that's such a passion for you, but I'm just wondering, it might be helpful for the room to think about how we can support librarians and booksellers, and like, how can we stay motivated?
You know what? I don't know if I have any good answers, and I pride myself on making sure to say you don't know when you don't know. I won't tell y'all no lies. I don't know. What I do think is interesting is making sure that we don't have to necessarily rely on the schools to create sort of space for these young people to read these books, right? Like for the schools that are doing it and that are pushing back, we're going to always champion them however we can. I don't know how, whether it be, because first of all, because y'all in New York City and it ain't happening here. right? And I'm always careful about sticking my nose in the business of a town or a community that I don't live in, because you don't know the politics of that community and you don't know whose jobs are on the line, right? So I'm always, like, I've been in situations where I've tried to sort of step in and teachers are like, I'm finna get fired because you're coming into a lion's den and you have no idea it's a lion's den. Let us deal with it down here. Like, let us take care of home. You gotta mind your business. We'll call you when we need you, right? But like, you stepping in could exacerbate things, right? It could inflame things even more. And so I'm always a little, you check your ego, right? You want to save everybody, and it's like, there are people who are doing the saving already, right? And it just takes time sometimes, right? In the meantime, though, I think that there are also people who are like, all right, while this is happening and while these books have been taken off the shelf, we got reading groups, we got book clubs, we have a community, right? Like, you're using your community centers if you have them, using all other spaces to engage with young people. We need third spaces, right? Like, young people need third spaces. And what I mean by third spaces is that young people's lives typically, outside of New York City and major cities like this, young people's lives typically consist of home and school. But they desperately need third spaces, because it's the third space that is more malleable and more fluid, and that they can sort of break and bend more rules to do the things that we need them to do that can't be done in school and in some of their homes, for that matter, right? And so in those communities, I just encourage the idea and the creation of and they don't have to be any actual, take these kids to McDonald's and let's get this book club popping.
That's right.
Right, whatever it takes,
Just listening to you talk about this and thinking about our conversation from a few moments ago about Miles and his responsibility and him being anchored in his neighborhood, just feeling a lot of parallels with your own story in some ways. And I'm just wondering, how do you feel that tension between your rising visibility and responsibility, and how do you manage that in your own life, if that's not too personal of a question?
Nah, it's a good question, and it's tough, right? I think, when I left New York City and moved back to DC in 2017, 18, something like that, everybody was like, because I came here 21-year-old with a trash bag full of sneakers, right? And I left here with a career and a whole different life. And everyone's like, and for those of you who know DC, everyone's like, you gonna move to Georgetown? Which is basically like saying, you gonna move to the Upper East Side, right? And yeah, like, you gonna move to Georgetown? You gonna get you like a mansion in Georgetown? And I'm like, what? Like, no, first of all, my mother would kill me. Absolutely not. I'm going to move to a neighborhood where we are. I want to move amongst the people. I want to live amongst the people because I'm still amongst the people. Ain't nothing, like, I am who I am all the time. This is, I live, everybody know where my house at, right? Like, they walk by, open the door, they sitting on the steps. What's up, Mr. Jason? Everything cool? Everything cool? You got a new book coming out? It's coming soon, you know what I mean? And I value, because that's the way it was when I was in Brooklyn, right? There was no running away from it, right? I'm not afraid of, I love my people deeply, like to the bone. And I'd rather deal with the complexity of my neighborhood than to extinguish my relationship with the people who made me. I'd rather make sure that every kid on that block knows that's Jason Reynolds' house, right? He lived right there. I can go knock on his door right now. And he gonna answer the door, and I can ask him if he got any books in there, and he can help me out if I need to, right? He lived right there. When the kids come, they sometimes in DC they have people riding around dropping off Uber, like Uber Eats and stuff like that, and the kids will be with their parents because like, they'd rather be with mom than be at home alone. And the kids will run up and knock on the door, right? Hi, Mr. Reynolds, like, here go your food, right? And I value, I value that. And honestly, it's a way to sort of regulate sort of my identity and who I am. I don't ever want to feel like I can't be touched or that I'm right here, right where I've been, right down the street. My mother living around the corner, right? We right here, and that means the world to me because the kids around there get to see it, and the old people get to say, "Hey man, we proud of you. We proud of you. Our property value gone up because you move around here, man." Which is cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's a perfect moment to segue to some of the audience questions that we have. Thank y'all so much for submitting these. Also, thank you to the interpreter who's over there working so hard for us to make sure this event is accessible.
Absolutely.
Okay, first one from Olivia. Regarding Long Way Down and Suspended, they have similarities in their format and the focused nature of their settings. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So here's my theory. So I was trained as a poet 25 years ago, and what you learn as a poet when you're trained in poetry is that your greatest tool, despite your poetic devices, right? Your greatest tool is boundary, right? Constraint. If I have a football field to play in, I don't exactly know what I might do. If I have a sandbox to play in, I have limited options, and therefore, my creativity will allow me to do far more than it would if I had a football field. If I was like, yo, you got a football field to play in, what you gonna do? Most people would say, I'm gonna run. I'm just gonna run up around, right? If you got a sandbox to play in, what you gonna do? I'm gonna dig, right? I'm gonna go deep, or I'm gonna build, right? These are very different spaces, and the sandbox might be this big. Right? And so for me, the way I think about it is like if you create boundary, if you say like all of this takes place in a single classroom on a single day, then I get to really activate a level of creativity that might not be there because I know where the boundary lines are, but I can get busy everywhere else. All within this boundary, I can do my dance everywhere I want. Right? And it has to be tight, which means that I have to pull out extra tricks to make it make sense. You know, I always tell people it's the equivalent of like if you're writing sort of a straight ahead novel, right? It's like you jumping off the roof of a house into like a swimming pool, right? It's like you can't miss. You just jump off the roof of the house, boom, you land in the pool. And writing a book like this, where it's in verse, or where parts of it are in verse, is like you standing on the top of a house and you have a pitcher of water and you pour it into a single glass that's all the way down below you, right? And you just pouring it all into this little glass, and it's that exact, and you don't spill a drop. Right? Both are valuable, right? When you jump in that pool from the top of the roof, you get to swim around and look at the mosaic tiles on the floor. You get to sort of explore all that the pool has to offer down here, right? But when you're the poet and you're pouring that glass, it got to all be in there. And it seems impossible, and that's the beauty of it. Because if you get it right, it requires extraordinary skill. It's a very different way to think about it. You have to plan a little differently, concentrate a little differently, think a little harder, right? Really check your pacing, right? Because you can't pour too heavy. Check your pacing so all of that water goes right in that glass. And in this book, you get a little bit of both, which is, to me, what makes it special. It's a good question, though. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Constraints are good. For all the young people in the room, remember that when your mama tell you can't do something, you know what I'm saying? It's to activate your creativity. You know what I mean? That one's for free, parents, you know what I mean?
I know, I'm like you're doing the good work. Okay, the next question doesn't say who it's from, but this is a great question. It says, if you could choose one Marvel character besides Miles to reimagine and give a new backstory, who would it be and how would you reimagine them?
Wolverine. Yeah,
That was
easy.
quick.
Yeah, no, gotta think about it all the time. I just think Wolverine is the greatest. So like before Miles, I got like a real thing, because he's an anti-hero. He's so messed up. Like he's got like a lot of stuff happening. Think about it. We're talking about, so look, here's the thing, right? Wolverine was always drawn as white. Mm-hmm. And that's cool. In my mind though, given his story, he definitely black.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, Wolverine clearly is a black person.
Yes, I'm with you.
The government done did him dirty. He done served the country. And then they started doing experiments. So I said, this sounds so familiar. And I think in my mind, I'm like, and he got all this anger, but he's not really angry, right? It's like a warranted anger. And he's got a temper. And really, it's just because like he's never been given an opportunity. He just ain't never had no therapy, right? It's like, He going through exactly what I'm going through right now, right? It's like everybody in my life is like, yeah, we basically a whole bunch of Wolverines. It's like we all feel indestructible, but we know that's not true, right? But I feel like it's like this weird sort of, he's the one that I feel most connected to that I would totally, I would go to town on a Wolverine story.
Listen.
It's not gonna happen. Just gonna go ahead and nip it now. But I think somebody should definitely, that's the story. To me, he's other than Miles, and I know we all love T'Challa now, but honestly, for me, and I love T'Challa too, but for me, Logan is different.
Yes.
That was a special character.
Heard. Okay, the next one also doesn't have a name, but thank you to whoever submitted this. The question is, how does it feel to write for a character that means so much to both kids and adults of color?
I'll tell you a really quick story. The other reason why this book happened, why I took on the Miles thing in general for the first book, I was in Oklahoma. So first of all, I told when I got the call and was asked to write Miles Morales, the first one, I said, let me think about it. And I was going to say no. I said, let me think about it. Then I hung up the phone and was like, ain't no way. At the time, I was working on Long Way Down, and I knew, I was like, I'm working on something right now that's I don't have time for this, right? I go to Tulsa, Oklahoma to talk to some kids, and which is a special place that all of you should go and visit. Tulsa is an interesting place for lots of reasons. And so I'm in Tulsa, all black school. I talked to a bunch of kids, like 2,000 kids. And as I'm leaving, the teacher who's put this whole thing on is like, hey man, there's like 6 or 7 black boys in school suspension. Can you go and just give them 10 or 15 minutes of your time before going back to your hotel? Of course. I go in the room and they're like, yo man, sorry we missed the event, we got in some trouble, et cetera, et cetera. What are you working on now? And I said, man, I'm working on this book. It's called Long Way Down, so forth and so on. Like, I think it's gonna be something. I'm like trying to figure it all out. And I'm like, I got an opportunity to do some work for Marvel. And they're like, well, what does Marvel want you to do? I'm like, they want me to write on this Miles Morales thing. And they're like, who's Miles Morales? At the time, Miles was not popular yet. I think there were like 6 issues of the comic. Like, he hadn't become the Miles Morales that we know now. And they said, who's Miles Morales? I said, oh, he's half black, half Puerto Rican. He's from Brooklyn. And they were like, wait a minute. He from like he black? And I was like, yeah. They're like, but like, are you going to write him? I was like, I don't know yet. They was like, if you do, he got to wear like sneakers like us. He got to come from like a neighborhood like us. Right? And they start to sort of like do this thing, and they're like wide awake all of a sudden. They're like, their eyes are huge. And I realized in this moment, it's like, I can't say no. And I walk out the door, and I make the call, and I say, I want to come in and talk about the opportunity. Let's see if I can figure something out, right? Like, that's how that went, right? And so if the question is, how do I feel about, like, this character becoming this other thing and meaning so much to so many people's lives, I feel honored and grateful to be a part of that legacy, first and foremost, and to have any role, any part in sort of the continued development of that character and the wholeness of Miles. And I also feel a tremendous amount of pressure. You know, every time a Miles Morales book come out, at least for the last 2 times mine have come out, you know, you just get trashed on the internet, you know what I mean? Because people have a hard time with change. People have a hard time with, like, you know, we want Peter Parker. You know, I remember when the first one came out, there was a hashtag, not my Spider-Man. You know, you go through all of that stuff too, and it hurts. I'd be lying if I say it doesn't hurt my feelings sometimes, right? But ultimately, it's when I go into the street or on Halloween, or, you know, when I see pictures of kids and they have the Miles costume on, or when I meet teenagers in the street and they're like, yo, man, your Miles book, man, like, it made me think about this, that, and the third, or all of that stuff. It makes it all worth it. So I just do my best to stay focused, keep my head on, and try not to let it get the best of me. Yeah.
Okay, this question is from Riel, and it says, why does Miles not have an MJ in his universe?
So here's the thing. It's a good question. Here's the thing. See, my Miles does have an MJ. The issue, not an issue. See, you know how you could tell Marvel in the room? Because I'm like, the truth of the matter is that there are inconsistencies. There's Miles the movie, there's Miles the video game, there's Miles the book, there's Miles the comics, and they ain't the same Miles. That's the truth. It is what it is, right? Y'all know this. If you read comics, you know there are all kinds of universes and versions and this, that, and the third, and it's no different with Miles. So, yes, there are many versions of Miles where he doesn't have an MJ. Both of my books, he does have an MJ. Her name is Alicia. If you read the first book, you know who Alicia is. Alicia is like his greatest inspiration. Alicia is in this story as well, still inspiring my man to be the best version of himself, like a good MJ should. Right? Like that's what he's basically, I only write stories. So like women in my books, girls in my books specifically, are always written the way that the girls in my life have always been, which is to say, as the leader. They are standard bearers, they are tone setters, they are the people saying, hey, you, my friend, need to get it together so that we can win, right? Follow my lead, and I'm going to lead us to the promised land. I didn't grow up with any damsels. I never known a damsel a day in my life. Been looking for them, never known one, right? My mama wasn't one, my aunties wasn't one, my sister wasn't one. None of my homegirls are damsels. Anybody I've ever dated wasn't a damsel. I've only been around women who are for better or for worse, the people who are ensuring that the rest of us are okay. When I was a kid, we would get into stuff in the neighborhood, and it'd always be my homegirls who'd be like, you want me to take care of it, Jay? And it'd be like, yes, I do want you to take care of it. You know what I'm saying? So to answer your question, in my versions, there is an MJ. There is an MJ. And I'm glad you said that, so tomorrow people can go back and say, why Miles don't have no MJ in the other versions of the story? You know?
Okay, this is the last question, and it's a really great one, so thank you to whoever put this one in. And it is, what advice do you have for a young Black writer?
I mean, you know, I think as I'm trying to consider what I would have wanted to hear when I was young, what I needed to hear. When I was 15, 16, sitting in an audience, not much different from this. And on the stage was a famous poet by the name of Amiri Baraka, who is no longer with us. For any of you Jersey folk, Ross Baraka is his son. And he was the leader of the Black Arts Movement in the 70s, and a legend. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I raised my hand during the Q&A portion. Raised my hand. I'm 15. I'm in the back of the room. He says, young man in the back, what's your question? And my question was, what advice would you give a young Black writer? And Baraka came to the microphone and he said, we took the microphone off the stand, and he said, let me tell you a story. He said, Billy the Kid in the old Wild West was challenged. They bet that he could not shoot a bullet through a grass blade. Billy told them, of course I can. They say, we don't believe you, Billy. We put our lives on the line. We don't think so. We bet our houses. It don't matter. You can't do it. Billy shows up to the town square the next day. Everybody gathers around. He said, everybody ready? He said, we ready, Billy. Pulls out his gun and pulls the trigger and shoots a bullet through a grass blade. And everybody was so surprised. And they said, Billy, how could you do that without even aiming? And Billy said, because I'm always aiming. And that's it. So my advice to you, young Black writer, is to always be prepared. Keep your tools with you. For y'all got cell phones, but keep a pen and a pad as well, right? Keep your tools. The most important tool, keep this one open, right? Be ready, right? Inspiration is everywhere, right? The thing that will change your life is everywhere. The thing that will, your language will be everywhere. You will learn new words every day. Keep that in, like keep track of everything you're learning, right? Be prepared. The likelihood that you hit the bullseye has everything to do with the amount of arrows in your quiver, right? They're going to tell you to write what you know, so know more, right? Know it all. Try to learn all there is to learn because it's there for you to learn. If you want to hang on to your imagination, then you have to make sure that your curiosity is stoked, right? That's what feeds your imagination. Live a curious life. Don't be closed or afraid of the things that aren't like you. And you can still be proud of your blackness in doing so, right? But be open to the world around you. Be open to the things that are not like you and that you don't know, because that, on top of that blackness, makes for a new thing. I appreciate y'all. And before we go, Jay, I want to say this to you. I think sometimes we take our luminaries for granted. For those of y'all who don't know Jay's work, Jay, culture writer for the Times, all kind of other amazing stuff. Their book is out there. Make sure y'all, get it on your way out. But I think sometimes we have to make public space to honor the people that really hold that banner for us, that really sort of step out there, who create work, who create opportunities for conversation, who create language to illustrate our lives, which they do every day, toiling, trying to figure out ways to codify a thing that feels so natural, but really is something that is magnificent and complicated, sometimes mathematical, sometimes alchemical, right? And I just want to take a second to say I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for the work that you've done over these years and the work that you continue to do. And I'm grateful that you could spend some time publicly with these lovely folk to talk about Spider-Man of all things. I appreciate you. So that's all. I just want to get that out. Thank y'all.
Thank you all for coming so much. And thank you, Jason. And just congratulations on the book and everything. You're amazing.
Thank
So
you.
lucky to have you.